Cranial and spinal nerves are peripheral nerves responsible for sensation and movement. The cranial nerves arise from the brain within the skull and affect sensation and muscles of the head, neck, and even many of the internal organs. There are 12 cranial nerves which are numbered using Roman numerals and in order from the highest to the lowest connection to the central nervous system. Listed here are the major questions you should be able to answer after viewing this presentation. These questions will again be displayed at the end of the unit for your review. Pause the presentation in order to take time to carefully read and understand these questions. These are the 12 cranial nerves, shown here for where they exit the central nervous system and listing their major functions. Pause the video as desired to review this graphic. The functions of the 12 cranial nerves will be divided between cranial nerves 1 through 8 and cranial nerves 9 through 12. Cranial nerves 1, 2, and 8 are sensory-only nerves. Cranial nerve 1 is the olfactory nerve and is responsible for the sensation of smell. This is the only sensory input to the central nervous system that does not first go to the thalamus. The olfactory nerve travels directly from the nose to the limbic lobe. Cranial nerve 2 is the optic nerve and travels from the retina of both eyes to the brain for the sensation of vision in the occipital lobe. Cranial nerve 8 is a special sensory nerve for hearing and equilibrium or balance based on movement and gravity and called the vestibulocochlear nerve. This is a special nerve which has special importance to therapy and will be discussed in more detail in a separate lecture. Cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6 serve the muscles of the eyes and therefore control eye movement. Cranial nerve 3 is the oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve 4 is the trochlear nerve, and cranial nerve 6 is the abducent nerve. Cranial nerves 5 and 7 are generally responsible for sensation and movement of the face and assist with feeding and digestion, which begins in the mouth. Cranial nerve 5 is called the trigeminal nerve, and its major functions are to facilitate the chewing muscles and also for general facial sensation. Cranial nerve 7 is called the facial nerve, and its major functions are to facilitate the muscles of the face and the salivary glands to assist with the beginning of digestion in the mouth cavity. Now, let's take a closer look at cranial nerves 9 through 12. Cranial nerve 9 is called the glossopharyngeal nerve and is responsible for taste and swallowing muscles of the throat and pharynx. Cranial nerve 10 is called the vagus nerve. This is a special cranial nerve that travels from the brain down into the thoracic and abdominal cavities. It is responsible to help control the functions of the heart and lungs, as well as the organs associated with digestion. Cranial nerve 11 is called the accessory nerve and is responsible for the movement of two muscles, the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. The sternocleidomastoid muscle attaches from the breastbone and clavicle or collarbone in the front of the neck up to the mastoid process of the skull, just behind the ear. It assists with flexion and rotation of the neck. The trapezius muscle is a thin, broad muscle on the upper back which attaches from the skull and cervical and thoracic vertebrae to the clavicle or collarbone and scapula. It helps with many of the movements of the shoulder. Cranial nerve 12 is called the hypoglossal nerve and assists in movement of some of the anterior neck muscles, which are also referred to as the strap muscles. Additionally, it also assists with taste. As at the beginning of the presentation, listed here are the major questions you should be able to answer after viewing this presentation. Pause the presentation in order to take time to carefully read and understand these questions.